a medieval queen, heavily pregnant, donned armor to command her troops against her own estranged husband in open battle. Another queen, facing a siege, personally put on armor, rallied her despairing townsfolk and led 300 horsemen on a daring raid, burning the enemy's main camp to the ground. One resolute monarch spent years campaigning alongside her soldiers, meticulously overseeing the siege of a formidable enemy capital until its fall. A teenage queen, thrust into a brutal civil war, became the indomitable spirit of her faction, raising armies and fighting relentlessly for her son's inheritance. And a devout countess for over 30 years personally commanded her armies against the might of the Holy Roman Emperor, becoming a fortress for the papacy. These weren't just royal figures. They were battlefield leaders. Number 5. Urraca of León and Castile, the queen who fought her own husband. Urraca became Queen of León, Castile, and Galicia in 1109, inheriting a sprawling and turbulent kingdom in what is now Spain. She was the first reigning queen in European history to hold such extensive territories in her own right. Her father, Alfonso VI, had designated her as his heir, a significant move in an era where male succession was the norm. Urraca was already a widow, having been married to Raymond of Burgundy, with whom she had a son, the future Alfonso VII. To secure her realm and provide a strong military leader, Urraca was pressured into a second marriage shortly after her coronation. Her new husband was Alfonso, the first of Aragon and Navarre, known as Alfonso the Battler for his military prowess and aggressive nature. The marriage contract stipulated that their children would inherit their combined kingdoms, sidelining Urraca's son Alfonso Raymondez. This arrangement was deeply unpopular with the Leonese and Castilian nobility, who feared Aragonese domination and cherished their young heir. The marriage was a disaster from the start. Alfonso the Battler was indeed a formidable warrior, but he was also reported to be misogynistic and abusive towards Urraca. He sought to rule her kingdoms as his own, sidelining Urraca and her authority. Urraca was not a woman to be easily dominated. She was intelligent, strong-willed, and determined to rule the lands she had inherited. The clash of these two powerful personalities, coupled with the political tensions, quickly escalated into open warfare between husband and wife. Urraca found herself fighting on multiple fronts. She faced rebellions from nobles who supported her son Alfonso Raymondez, incursions from the Almoravids from the south, and the aggressive ambitions of her own husband. In 1110, less than a year into their marriage, hostilities broke out. Alfonso the Battler, with his Aragonese forces, began occupying Castilian towns and castles. Urraca responded by gathering her own loyal troops. One of the most remarkable aspects of Urraca's reign was her personal involvement in military campaigns. She did not merely delegate command. She was often present with her armies, directing operations and rallying her supporters. Chroniclers of the time describe her as actively leading her forces. In the complex series of conflicts that ensued, Urraca demonstrated considerable resilience. She negotiated alliances, raised armies, and engaged in sieges and battles. The war against Alfonso the Battler was particularly bitter. At the Battle of Candispina in 1111, Urraca's forces, commanded by her chief supporter, Count Gómez González, were defeated by Alfonso the Battler. Count Gómez was killed in the fighting. Despite this setback, Urraca continued the struggle. she found an unlikely ally in Henry of Portugal, her half-sister Teresa's husband, though alliances in this period were notoriously shifting. There were instances where Urraca directly confronted her husband's forces. She led troops to relieve besieged towns and to reclaim territories he had seized. The Galician nobility, fiercely loyal to her son Alfonso Raymondez, provided a strong base of support. Urraca skillfully used her son's claim to rally opposition against her husband. She even had her marriage to Alfonso the Battler annulled by the Pope on grounds of consanguinity. They were distant cousins, though Alfonso initially refused to accept this. One notable episode occurred in 1112. Alfonso the Battler had Urraca besieged in Astorga. According to some accounts, Urraca managed to escape or negotiate her way out, regrouping her forces. She continued to fight him, sometimes winning, sometimes losing, but never giving up her claim to rule. She even once took Alfonso the Battler prisoner, though he later escaped. The struggle was relentless, with towns changing hands multiple times. Urraca's political acumen was as crucial as her military efforts. She navigated a complex web of loyalties, betrayals, and shifting alliances. She understood the importance of propaganda and used her status as the legitimate queen and mother of the heir to bolster her cause. Her half-sister, Teresa, Countess of Portugal, also became an adversary, attempting to expand her own territories at Urraca's expense. Urraca campaigned against Teresa as well, at one point capturing her. Even while pregnant with a child from a later relationship, after her separation from Alfonso the Battler, but before the marriage was officially annulled, Urraca was reportedly active in military affairs. The Chronica Adelphansi Imperatoris, a contemporary source, mentions her presence with her army. Leading troops while pregnant shows her extraordinary determination and the expectations placed upon her, or that she placed upon herself. By 1114, the tide began to turn more decisively in Urraca's favor in her war against Alfonso the Battler. While he continued to hold some Castilian territories, his grip was weakening. Urraca focused on consolidating her power and securing the succession for her son Alfonso Raymondez. She managed to outmaneuver many of her internal enemies through a combination of force and diplomacy. Urraca's reign was one of near-constant warfare. She fought against her husband, rebellious nobles, her half-sister, and external threats. She maintained her position as queen through sheer force of will and an active engagement in the military and political struggles of her time. She died in 1126, still dealing with rebellions, but she had successfully preserved her kingdoms and ensured that her son, Alfonso VII, would succeed her. Her reign demonstrated that a medieval queen could indeed command armies and navigate the brutal politics of her era, even when pitted against a renowned warrior king who was also her husband. Number 4. Joanna of Flanders, the fiery duchess who torched an enemy camp. Joanna of Flanders, also known as Jeanne de Flandre or Jeanne la Flamme, Fiery Joan, earned her place in history during the War of the Breton Succession, a brutal conflict that became entangled with the larger Hundred Years' War between England and France in the mid-14th century. Born around 1295, Joanna was the wife of John of Montfort, one of the claimants to the Duchy of Brittany. When her husband was captured and imprisoned by the French, who supported the rival claimant Charles of Blois, Joanna stepped into the breach with astonishing courage and military initiative. The War of the Breton Succession began in 1341, after the death of Duke John III of Brittany, who died childless. Both John of Montfort, John III's half-brother, and Charles of Blois, husband of John III's niece, Jeanne de Penthièvre, laid claim to the duchy. John of Montfort acted quickly, seizing key towns like Nantes and Brest. However, Charles of Blois had the backing of King Philip VI of France. Later that year, John of Montfort was besieged in Nantes, captured and imprisoned in Paris. With her husband locked away and the Montfort cause seemingly lost, most would have expected Joanna to sue for peace or flee. Instead, she resolved to fight. She presented her infant son, also named John, to the Montfortist supporters in Rennes, rallying them to continue the struggle for her son's inheritance. Her impassioned speeches and unwavering determination inspired loyalty. She declared that her husband was not defeated and that she would lead them. Joanna proved to be a natural leader. She traveled from town to town, shoring up defenses, raising troops, and securing provisions. She understood the strategic importance of holding key fortresses and sought aid from King Edward III of England, who was eager to support anyone opposing the French king. Edward recognized John of Montfort, and by extension, Joanna and her son, as the rightful Duke of Brittany. Her most famous exploit occurred during the siege of Hennebont in 1342. Hennebont was a strategically vital port town on the Blavet River, and Joanna had made it her stronghold. Charles of Blois, with a substantial French army, laid siege to the town, hoping to capture Joanna and crush the Montfortist resistance. The siege was intense. Charles's forces bombarded the walls with trebuchets and launched repeated assaults. Provisions within Hennebont dwindled, and morale began to waver. Some of the town's defenders, including a bishop, urged Joanna to surrender. Joanna refused. According to the chronicler Jean Froissart, who provides a vivid, if sometimes embellished account of these events, Joanna donned armor and took an active role in the defense. She patrolled the ramparts, encouraged her soldiers, and ordered women and children to help by carrying stones and supplies to the defenders. Froissart describes her as having the courage of a man and the heart of a lion. Seeing her troops despondent after a particularly fierce assault, Joanna climbed a tower to observe the enemy camp. She noticed that the main French camp was poorly guarded, with many soldiers and commanders having left their posts to watch the assault or to rest. Seizing the opportunity, Joanna quickly gathered a force of about 300 mounted knights and men-at-arms. Clad in her armor, she led this small force out of a little-used gate, rode hard around the town, and fell upon the undefended enemy camp. They cut down tents, set fire to supplies and pavilions, and created chaos. The main camp of Charles of Blois was soon engulfed in flames. This daring sortie, led by Joanna herself, was a stunning success and a huge morale booster for the besieged defenders. It also threw the besiegers into disarray. When French reinforcements rushed to defend their camp, Joanna and her raiders found their path back to Hennebont cut off. Instead of panicking, she led her men to ride for Brest, another Montfortist stronghold about 30 miles away. 5 days later, having gathered reinforcements in Brest, Joanna and her enlarged force fought their way back into Hennebont, arriving just as the defenders were on the verge of surrendering. Her dramatic return with fresh troops reinvigorated the defense. Shortly thereafter, an English fleet under Sir Walter Manny arrived, bringing supplies and reinforcements, forcing Charles of Blois to lift the siege of Hennebont. Joanna's personal bravery and tactical acumen during the siege had saved the Montfort cause. Her actions at Hennebont earned her the nickname Joan la Flamme, or Fiery Joan. Joanna continued to be active in the war. She organized naval defenses, commissioning ships to harass Blois' supply lines. She even participated in naval skirmishes off the coast of Guernsey. She understood the importance of English support and maintained close ties with Edward III's commanders. Her leadership kept the Montfort faction alive during a critical period when its figurehead, her husband, was imprisoned. Eventually, John of Montfort was released from prison in 1345, or escaped, accounts vary. He briefly rejoined the fight, but died shortly thereafter. Joanna, however, continued to fight for her son's rights. She traveled to England to secure further support, entrusting her son to King Edward III's care. Her later life is less clearly documented. Some sources suggest she suffered from mental illness later on and was confined in England, though the details are murky. Despite this, her actions in 1341 to 1342 were decisive. She had demonstrated extraordinary courage, military leadership, and political resolve at a time when women were rarely seen in such roles. The War of the Breton Succession dragged on for many more years, but Joanna of Flanders' fiery leadership during its early stages ensured that the Montfort claim would ultimately, after her direct involvement had ceased, prevail, with her son becoming Duke John IV of Brittany. Number 3. Matilda of Tuscany. The papal sword against an emperor. Matilda of Tuscany, known as La Grande Contessa, the Great Countess, was one of the most powerful and influential women of the European Middle Ages. Born around 1046 into a noble family that controlled vast territories in northern Italy, including Tuscany, Lombardy, and Emilia-Romagna, Matilda became a staunch supporter of the papacy during the investiture controversy, a major conflict between the Church and the Holy Roman Empire. For decades, she personally led her armies and wielded her considerable political power against the might of the Holy Roman emperors, particularly Henry IV. Matilda inherited her vast domains and a legacy of loyalty to the reformist papacy from her parents, Boniface III of Tuscany and Beatrice of Lorraine. After her father's assassination and her mother's subsequent remarriage and imprisonment by Emperor Henry III, Matilda developed a deep distrust of imperial power and an unwavering devotion to the Church. She was highly educated for a woman of her time, fluent in several languages, and possessed a keen understanding of military strategy and governance. The investiture controversy, the central conflict of Matilda's adult life, was a struggle over who had the authority to appoint, invest, bishops and abbots, the Pope or the Holy Roman Emperor. This was not just a religious dispute. Bishops and abbots controlled significant lands, wealth, and military forces, making their appointment a critical issue of power. Pope Gregory VII, a key figure in the Gregorian reform movement, was determined to free the Church from secular control. Matilda became his most dedicated and powerful ally. Matilda's military involvement began in earnest in the 1070s. She commanded her own feudal levies, knights, and militias, drawn from her extensive territories. These lands were strategically vital, controlling important alpine passes and roads between Germany and Rome. When Emperor Henry IV defied Pope Gregory VII and was excommunicated in 1076, It was Matilda who provided refuge and support for the Pope. The famous walk to Canossa in January 1077, where Henry IV, barefoot in the snow, begged Pope Gregory VII for forgiveness, took place at Matilda's castle of Canossa. While this event is often seen as a moment of papal triumph, it was also a testament to Matilda's power. She was the one providing the secure location and mediating between the two most powerful men in Western Europe. Her military forces ensured the Pope's safety. Henry IV's submission was temporary. The conflict soon resumed, and Matilda found herself at the forefront of the military struggle against the emperor in Italy. For the next 30 years, she repeatedly led her troops into battle. She was not a ceremonial leader. Contemporary accounts and later chronicles describe her as being present with her armies, making strategic decisions, and even participating in the direction of sieges and battles. She was known for her piety, but also for her martial prowess and determination. In 1081, Henry IV invaded Italy again, determined to depose Pope Gregory VII and install his own anti-pope. Matilda's forces became the main line of defense for the papacy. She engaged in a protracted war against the emperor and his Italian allies. Her troops fought numerous skirmishes and battles. In 1084, at the Battle of Sorbra near Modena, Matilda's forces, though possibly outnumbered, achieved a significant victory against imperial troops. This victory demonstrated her military capability and boosted the morale of the papal party. Matilda understood the importance of fortifications. She strengthened existing castles and built new ones throughout her domains, creating a network of defensive strongholds. She also adeptly used diplomacy and propaganda, fostering loyalty among her subjects and portraying her fight as a defense of the true church. She was known to inspire deep loyalty in her soldiers. Despite her efforts, Henry IV eventually managed to occupy Rome in 1084, forcing Pope Gregory VII into exile, where he died the following year. Matilda, however, did not give up. She continued the fight on behalf of Gregory's successors, Pope Victor III and Pope Urban II, who would later launch the First Crusade. She maintained control over much of northern and central Italy, denying the emperor full control of the peninsula. Matilda's personal life was also intertwined with her political and military roles. She was married twice. First to Godfrey, the Hunchback, Duke of Lower Lorraine, a politically motivated match that was largely unhappy and childless. Her second marriage, late in life, was to Welf, V of Bavaria, a much younger man. This marriage was also a political alliance, intended to strengthen the anti-imperial coalition. It too was childless, and eventually dissolved. Her primary devotion remained to the papacy and the governance of her lands. In the 1090s, Matilda played a key role in supporting a rebellion against Henry IV, led by his own son Conrad Taufrey. She provided military and financial backing to Conrad. She continued to lead her armies, and in 1092 her forces inflicted another defeat on Henry IV at the Battle of Canossa, this time a military engagement near her famous castle, further undermining his authority in Italy. Matilda's long struggle outlasted Henry IV. After his death, she continued to support the papacy against his successor, Henry V, although the nature of the conflict began to change. She eventually reached a form of reconciliation with Henry V in 1111, though she never wavered in her support for papal authority in spiritual matters. Before her death in 1115, Matilda bequeathed all her allodial, privately owned, lands to the papacy. This vast inheritance became a source of future conflict between popes and emperors, but it also significantly increased the temporal power of the Church, a lasting testament to her devotion. Matilda of Tuscany stands out as a female ruler who for decades effectively commanded armies, governed vast territories, and played a central role in one of the most significant political and religious conflicts of the High Middle Ages. Her military leadership was not an isolated incident, but a sustained feature of her long and influential reign. Number 2. Margaret of Anjou, the she-wolf who fought for a crown. Margaret of Anjou, Queen Consort of England, became one of the most formidable and controversial figures in the Wars of the Roses, the dynastic civil war that tore England apart in the latter half of the 15th century. Born in 1430 in France, Margaret was the daughter of René, Duke of Anjou, and titular King of Naples. She married King Henry VI of England in 1445 as part of a peace treaty designed to end the 100 Years' War. She was intelligent, proud, and fiercely protective of her husband, and later her son. King Henry VI was a pious but ineffectual ruler, prone to bouts of mental illness that left him incapable of governing. As Henry's mental state deteriorated, factions at court began to vie for power. The most prominent rival to the ruling Lancastrian faction, to which Henry and Margaret belonged, was Richard, Duke of York. York had a strong claim to the throne himself, and became increasingly critical of the king's corrupt and incompetent advisors. Margaret, initially a young and inexperienced queen, found herself thrust into the heart of these political intrigues. She was a staunch defender of her husband's crown and the rights of their only son, Edward of Westminster, Prince of Wales, born in 1453 during one of Henry's periods of catatonia. Margaret deeply distrusted Richard of York, viewing him as a direct threat to her son's inheritance. She became the de facto leader of the Lancastrian cause, especially during Henry VI's incapacities. Her active involvement in politics and eventually military affairs was unusual for a queen consort of her time, but the dire circumstances demanded it. She was not content to be a passive observer. As York's influence grew, culminating in his being named protector of the realm during Henry's illness, Margaret worked tirelessly to build a coalition of nobles loyal to the Lancastrian dynasty. She was described by her enemies as ambitious and ruthless, earning her the moniker She, Wolf of France, from Yorkist propagandists. The Wars of the Roses effectively began in 1455 with the First Battle of St. Albans, where Yorkist forces defeated the Lancastrians and captured King Henry VI. Margaret was not present at this battle, but its outcome galvanized her. She became the driving force behind the Lancastrian resistance. She raised armies negotiated for support both within England and abroad, particularly from Scotland and France, and strategized military campaigns. Her personal involvement in military matters intensified after the Battle of Northampton in 1460, where the Lancastrians were again defeated, and the Duke of York persuaded Parliament to pass the Act of Accord, naming him Henry's heir, thereby disinheriting Margaret's son, Edward. This was an intolerable situation for Margaret. She refused to accept the Act of Accord and fled to Scotland with her son. In Scotland, Margaret raised a new army. She was relentless in her efforts. she promised the Scots the town of Berwick upon Tweed in exchange for military aid. With this new force, largely composed of northern Englishmen loyal to Lancaster and Scottish mercenaries, Margaret marched south. On December 30th, 1460, her Lancastrian army met the forces of Richard, Duke of York, at the Battle of Wakefield. Margaret was not on the battlefield itself, but she was the strategic commander and the inspiration behind the campaign. The Lancastrians won a decisive victory. Richard of York was killed, along with his second son, Edmund, Earl of Rutland, and Richard Neville, Earl of Salisbury. Their heads were displayed on the gates of York, with York's head mockingly adorned with a paper crown. Following Wakefield, Margaret's army marched south towards London, plundering and causing devastation along the way, which alienated many potential supporters in the south of England. On February 17th, 1461, her forces clashed with a Yorkist army led by Richard Neville, Earl of Warwick, known as the Kingmaker, at the Second Battle of St. Albans. This time, Margaret was reportedly present near the battlefield, though not fighting directly. The Lancastrians were again victorious, and King Henry VI, who had been a captive in Warwick's camp, was rescued. Despite these victories, Margaret failed to capitalize on them by taking London. The city's inhabitants, wary of her northern army's reputation for pillaging, refused her entry. Meanwhile, Richard of York's eldest son, Edward, Earl of March, had won a victory at Mortimer's Cross and was marching towards London. Edward entered London, was proclaimed King Edward IV, and then pursued Margaret's retreating army north. On March 29, 1461, the two sides met at the Battle of Towton, one of the largest and bloodiest battles ever fought on English soil. Margaret and her son were present in York, nearby, but not at the battle itself. The Lancastrians suffered a catastrophic defeat. Margaret, Henry VI, and Prince Edward were forced to flee once more to Scotland. For the next several years, Margaret continued her struggle from exile. She sought aid from King Louis XI of France, offering Calais in return for support. She mounted several unsuccessful attempts to invade England. Her determination was extraordinary, but the Yorkist regime under Edward IV was consolidating its power. In 1465, Henry VI was captured and imprisoned in the Tower of London. Margaret's fortunes briefly revived in 1470 when the powerful Earl of Warwick, previously her bitter enemy, switched allegiance. Warwick, alienated by Edward IV, formed an alliance with Margaret, brokered by Louis XI, and invaded England. Edward IV was forced to flee, and Henry VI was briefly restored to the throne. Margaret and her son prepared to return to England. However, their triumph was short-lived. Margaret and Prince Edward landed at Weymouth on the very day, April 14, 1471, that Warwick was defeated and killed by Edward IV at the Battle of Barnet. Despite this devastating news, Margaret, encouraged by remaining Lancastrian lords, resolved to fight on. She raised another army in the west of England. On May 4, 1471, Margaret's final army faced Edward IV's forces at the Battle of Tewkesbury. Sources indicate Margaret was present with her army, possibly trying to rally them, although her 17-year-old son, Prince Edward, was the nominal commander. The Lancastrians were utterly defeated. Prince Edward was killed either during the battle or executed shortly thereafter. Margaret herself was captured a few days later. Her husband, Henry VI, died, or was murdered, in the Tower of London soon after. Margaret remained a prisoner in England for several years until Louis XI of France ransomed her in 1475. She returned to France, where she lived in poverty until her death in 1482. Margaret of Anjou's life was a dramatic and often tragic testament to her indomitable will. While her direct command on the battlefield is debated for some engagements, her role as the strategic leader, chief recruiter, and unwavering spirit of the Lancastrian cause during the Wars of the Roses is undeniable. She raised multiple armies and was the driving force behind years of intense military campaigning. Number 1. Isabella I of Castile, the queen who forged a nation in war. Isabella I of Castile, born in 1451, was one of the most influential and powerful monarchs in European history. Her reign, alongside her husband Ferdinand II of Aragon, marked the unification of Spain, the completion of the Reconquista, the establishment of the Spanish Inquisition, and the funding of Christopher Columbus's voyage to the New World. Central to many of these bloody events was Isabella's direct and personal involvement in military affairs, particularly during the Granada War. Isabella's path to the throne was not straightforward. After the death of her half-brother, King Henry IV of Castile, in 1474, Isabella proclaimed herself Queen of Castile. However, her claim was contested by Joanna la Beltraneca, Henry IV's daughter, who was supported by Portugal. This sparked the War of the Castilian Succession, 1475 to 1479. During this conflict, Isabella, already married to Ferdinand of Aragon, demonstrated her mettle. She was not content to let Ferdinand and her nobles do all the fighting. Isabella actively participated in the war effort. She traveled extensively throughout Castile, rallying support, raising troops and funds, and overseeing the administration of her kingdom even in wartime. She was known for her determination and her ability to inspire loyalty. Contemporary accounts describe her reviewing troops and being present at or near sieges. For example, during the Siege of Toro in 1476, a key moment in the war, Isabella was actively involved in ensuring the army was supplied and morale was maintained. She understood the logistics of warfare and the importance of a well-supported army. Her efforts were crucial in securing victory over Joanna and the Portuguese, solidifying her claim to the Castilian throne. Once her position as Queen of Castile was secure, Isabella, together with Ferdinand, who became King of Aragon in 1479, uniting the two largest Spanish kingdoms under their joint rule as the Catholic monarchs, turned their attention to the Emirate of Granada. Granada was the last remaining Muslim stronghold on the Iberian Peninsula, a remnant of the centuries-long Moorish presence. The campaign to conquer Granada, known as the Granada War, lasted from 1482 to 1492. Isabella's role in the Granada War was far more than that of a supportive consort. She was a driving force behind the campaign and often took on responsibilities typically associated with a military commander. She viewed the war as a holy crusade and was deeply committed to its success. She spent long periods in military encampments with the army, sharing the hardships of her soldiers and personally overseeing many aspects of the war effort. She was instrumental in organizing and financing the massive military undertaking. The Granada War required a large, well-equipped, and sustained army. Isabella pawned her own jewels and secured loans to fund the war. She was meticulous in managing the supply lines, ensuring that the troops received food, weapons, and pay. This logistical organization was a critical factor in the eventual Christian victory. She established field hospitals, a relatively new concept at the time, demonstrating a concern for the welfare of her soldiers that also helped maintain army cohesion and morale. Isabella was frequently present at the front lines, often riding among her troops, sometimes reportedly wearing armor or attire that resembled it. While she did not typically engage in hand-to-hand combat, her presence was a powerful symbol. It boosted the morale of her soldiers and demonstrated her personal commitment to the cause. She would review the troops, consult with her generals, and make strategic decisions. She understood the psychological impact of a monarch's presence in a military campaign. During the long and arduous sieges that characterized the Granada War, such as the sieges of Malaga, 1487, and Baza, 1489, Isabella was often in the royal camp nearby. The siege of Malaga was particularly brutal. After the city fell, Isabella and Ferdinand made a triumphal entry. The population was largely enslaved or held for ransom. Isabella's religious fervor was a powerful motivator, and she believed the conquest of Granada was God's will. The final siege of the city of Granada began in 1491. Isabella and Ferdinand established a massive military camp nearby which they named Santa Fe, Holy Faith. This was not just a temporary encampment, it was built as a permanent town, a symbol of their determination to see the siege through to its conclusion, no matter how long it took. Isabella resided in Santa Fe for extended periods, overseeing the progress of the siege and managing the affairs of her kingdom from there. Her presence ensured that the pressure on Granada remained constant. In January 1492, after nearly 10 years of warfare, Granada finally surrendered. Isabella and Ferdinand made their ceremonial entry into the city, a moment that symbolized the end of the Reconquista and the unification of Spain under Christian rule. Isabella's personal dedication and active involvement in the military and logistical aspects of the Granada War were widely recognized by her contemporaries. Chroniclers praised her courage, piety, and leadership. Beyond the Granada War, Isabella's reign saw the Spanish military transformed into one of the most formidable fighting forces in Europe. She and Ferdinand reorganized the army, introduced new tactics and technologies such as pike formations and improved artillery, and established a more permanent military structure. Isabella's image as a warrior queen was carefully cultivated. She understood the power of symbolism and used it effectively to bolster her authority and rally support for her causes. Her direct participation in military campaigns, her unwavering determination, and her skillful management of resources made her an indispensable leader in the wars that shaped modern Spain. She was not just a queen who witnessed battles. She was a queen who actively waged war and led her kingdom to victory.